Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories.
The room shimmered with a golden glow, the air thick with the sound of applause that echoed like a thunderstorm across the elegant hall. Guests stood, their eyes wide with admiration, as flowers cascaded from every pillar, filling the space with a soft fragrance. Laughter bubbled between the chandeliers, adding to the magic of the moment. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Grant, a stunning vision in white lace, her smile brighter than any jewel or dress she'd ever worn. Her eyes were locked on the man in front of her, the man who had captured her heart despite all odds. Across from her, seated in a sleek black wheelchair, was Daniel Walker, his dark eyes fixed on her as though she were the only person in the room. In that moment, nothing else mattered. With trembling hands, Vanessa gently slid the wedding ring onto his finger, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming flood of emotions rushing through her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. No words, no movement, just an unspoken understanding, a memory of everything that had led them here. Because this wedding wasn't born from fairy tales, it was born from sacrifice, from blood and tears, from a moment that should have ended in tragedy, but instead became the beginning of something extraordinary. A year earlier, the rain had come down in sheets, hammering the pavement like 1,000 tiny fists. The sky roared with thunder, splitting the heavens open, as though nature itself was about to tear the world apart. Vanessa, soaked to the bone, clutched her bag tightly to her chest, her heart racing from the exhaustion of a long shift at the restaurant. Her umbrella had betrayed her, flinging itself into the traffic with one swift gust of wind. The streets, bathed in the dim light of the failing street lamps, felt eerie and empty. Vanessa barely registered the red crosswalk light flickering in front of her, too tired to care. She took a step forward, unaware of the looming truck charging toward her. The headlights pierced through the rain like a spear, and the deafening roar of the engine was all she heard before everything else went silent. Then, like a blur, someone slammed into her from the side. Strong arms wrapped around her, yanking her out of the truck's path just in time. She crashed hard onto the wet concrete, the world spinning around her. The truck screeched, its brakes screaming in protest as metal crunched against the pavement. The next thing Vanessa saw was the body of the stranger who had thrown himself at her, flung onto the hood of the truck before being thrown aside like a rag doll. He lay still, motionless in the downpour, blood pooling around his leg. The world seemed to freeze. Vanessa, still on the ground, crawled toward him, her breath ragged, sobs racking her chest. "Why?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that?" Through gritted teeth, pain lacing his words, Daniel whispered, barely audible over the storm, "Can't let something happen to someone worth saving." His voice trembled, but his eyes were unwavering, filled with an unspoken promise. She didn't leave his side after that. Not once. Every day, she visited him in the hospital, sitting by his bed, talking to him, laughing, crying. She learned about his past, his life as a former track athlete, his dreams, and how he now worked as a youth counselor. But more than anything, she learned that Daniel had a heart bigger than anyone she had ever known. He lived alone, never asking for help, but always giving it. Even after the accident, he remained the same person, with the same selflessness that had led him to save her life. But now, he needed help. Help she was more than willing to give. As the months passed, their visits turned into dates. The dates turned into love. The love blossomed into something deeper, more profound than either of them could have ever imagined. And then, in a quiet moment, Daniel had proposed. It shocked everyone. Her friends raised their eyebrows, whispered behind her back. "You're too young to take on that kind of responsibility," they said. Some of them even dared to ask, "Are you sure this isn't just guilt?" But Vanessa knew something they didn't. Daniel had saved her life, not once, but countless times. He had pulled her out of the darkness and given her a reason to live, a reason to love. And that was a gift she would never take for granted. Vanessa never once thought of leaving his side. She couldn't. The months spent with Daniel in the hospital had woven a bond between them, one that was stronger than any fleeting notion of pity or obligation. It was built on something far more solid: respect, admiration, and a deep, undeniable connection. She visited him every single day. Each time she walked into his room, she didn't see a broken man in a wheelchair. She saw a man who had sacrificed everything to save her. And as she spoke with him, they laughed, argued over movies, teased each other like old friends. Through the pain and the sterile hospital room, they had found a rhythm, a way to share the quiet moments that felt almost like home. Vanessa learned more about Daniel than anyone could know in a lifetime. His past as a star athlete was something he rarely spoke of, but she could hear the silence behind his words, feel the ache in his eyes when he would talk about the tracks he used to run on, the races he used to win. He never said it outright, but Vanessa could tell that his injury, the one that took away his ability to walk, was not just physical. It had stolen his sense of self, his pride, his future. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, Daniel had chosen to live. He poured all of his energy into helping others, especially the kids at the community center where he worked as a counselor. He never asked for anything, but always offered more than anyone could give. But Vanessa wasn't about to let him fade into the shadows. She saw past the wheelchair, past the scars that defined his body, but not his spirit. She began bringing him books, movies, anything that could spark some joy in his life, something to fill the days that dragged by in the hospital. She helped him adjust to life in a wheelchair, not out of pity, but out of love. And slowly, through all the long nights and painful mornings, their friendship blossomed into something neither of them had expected. What started as a simple act of kindness on her part grew into a deep, unwavering love. As the weeks turned into months, their connection solidified. They began dating, quietly at first, then with more confidence as they realized that what they shared wasn't just born of circumstance, it was born of choice. They didn't need pity. They didn't need approval from anyone. What they needed was each other. When Vanessa told him she loved him, it wasn't out of gratitude or obligation. It was because she had found a partner, someone who made her feel more alive than she ever had before. He had saved her life in the most literal sense, but in return, he had given her something she never thought she'd find, a reason to believe in love again. Then came the proposal. It came when no one expected it, when both of them were still finding their way, still healing from the wounds that life had inflicted on them. Vanessa had always thought she would never be the type to rush into anything. But with Daniel, it felt different. The moment he asked her to marry him, despite the doubts that plagued both their families, despite the whispers of too soon, Vanessa knew in her heart that this was the man she wanted by her side, forever. His love wasn't based on what he could give her materially or even physically. It was based on something far more valuable, his heart. And in that heart, she knew there was no room for anything but pure, unselfish love. When her friends whispered doubts, when they questioned whether it was guilt or true love that had led her to this moment, Vanessa didn't waver. She didn't need to explain herself. She knew that this love was real. Daniel had shown her the kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return, the kind that didn't falter even when life threw its worst at them. And that, to her, was worth more than anything. The love they shared was built on a foundation of trust, of sacrifice, and of a commitment to something far greater than either of them could have ever imagined. As their love story unfolded, it became clear that nothing, no obstacle, no judgment could ever stand in the way of what they had found in each other. The night of their wedding had passed in a blur of laughter, cheers, and the sweet sound of clinking glasses. The world outside seemed so far away as they finally retreated to the quiet of their honeymoon suite, leaving behind the vibrant energy of their celebration. The room was softly lit, its elegance now dimmed by the exhaustion of the day. And as Vanessa looked at her reflection in the mirror, she began to peel away the layers of makeup, each stroke of the cloth pulling her closer to the rawness of the moment. Her wedding dress hung delicately over the back of a chair, its lace shimmering faintly in the low light. She could feel the weight of the day's emotions in her chest, but she had never felt more complete, more alive. Yet, something lingered in the air, something unsaid, something Daniel was holding back. Across the room, Daniel sat in his wheelchair, his tuxedo still sharp, his posture straight, though his eyes were soft, watchful, tender. He wasn't staring at her in the way most men might have, with desire or longing. No, there was something deeper in his gaze, something almost reverent, filled with awe, gratitude, and a quiet kind of awe that Vanessa couldn't quite place. She turned to him, the quiet comfort of their connection in that room feeling sacred, and smiled. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light, but underneath it, a flicker of curiosity. He nodded, his voice trembling just slightly. "More than okay," he murmured. Without a second thought, Vanessa crossed the room toward him, her bare feet silently pressing against the cool floor. As she knelt before him, her hands instinctively found his, resting softly against the warmth of his skin. "I meant what I said earlier," she whispered, her heart racing in her chest. "I don't care what we have or don't have. I love you exactly as you are." Daniel's eyes glistened, the weight of her words settling over him, making the moment heavier, sweeter. He swallowed, his breath shaky. "I know," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. She moved to help him out of his jacket, her hands gentle as she reached for the fabric, but he stopped her, his hand reaching out to catch hers. "Wait," he said, his voice quieter now. There was something about the way he said it, something in his eyes that made her pause, her heart skipping a beat. She looked at him, puzzled, but her concern quickly melted into curiosity. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft, filled with the warmth of love and a longing to understand. He reached beside his chair and pulled out a small black folder, handing it to her with careful hands. She looked at it for a moment, confused, before opening it. Inside, there were medical scans, rehabilitation progress reports, and notes that immediately piqued her interest. She scanned through the documents quickly, her brow furrowing as she read words like spinal stimulation, therapy, and progress. Daniel exhaled deeply, the weight of his secret finally lifting from his shoulders. "They told me not to get my hopes up," he said quietly, his voice faltering. "But after everything you did for me, after you said yes to me without expecting anything in return, I decided to try." Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "Try what?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing. Without another word, Daniel placed his hands firmly on the armrests of his wheelchair. With a slow, shaky movement, he pushed himself up. Vanessa's heart leaped in her chest as she watched him, her eyes wide, her hands trembling as she braced herself for what was to come. His legs, stiff and uncooperative at first, began to shift, to move, just enough to lift himself. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but for the first time, Daniel was standing. Vanessa stumbled backward, her hands flying to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't breathe. "How? How?" she gasped, her voice breaking. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. How was this even possible? Daniel, unsteady but determined, looked at her with a smile that was both triumphant and vulnerable. "You said you weren't sure if I could," he whispered, his voice shaky, almost uncertain. "For months, I've been working in secret. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want this to be about hope, about progress. I needed to know your love wasn't tied to whether or not I could stand. I needed to know that you believed in me, even when I couldn't." Vanessa's heart broke open with the weight of his words. She rushed forward, her arms wrapping tightly around him, her tears flowing freely now. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she whispered fiercely, pressing her cheek against his chest. I know. You've already given me everything I could ever need." Daniel held her tight, his voice trembling as he whispered back, "But I wanted to give you this, just once, to stand beside you the way you stood beside me, to show you that I'm still here." And in that quiet, perfect moment, everything in their world fell into place. It wasn't about the miracle of him standing or the secret he'd kept from her. It was about the unwavering love they had for each other. The kind of love that didn't need to be proven or justified. The kind of love that stood through every trial, every fear, and every uncertainty. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, holding on to something far more precious than physical ability, holding on to the kind of love that didn't falter, no matter what, Vanessa knew, without a doubt, that she had found her home. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his wheelchair, the effort of standing still taking a toll on his body. His muscles trembled, but the smile on his face was something different. It was a smile of triumph, of quiet pride, and of a love that had been tested and had withstood the storm. Vanessa knelt beside him, her hands gently touching his shoulder as he sank into the familiar comfort of his chair. She wasn't sure if she should speak, her mind racing, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. But before she could find her words, Daniel looked up at her, his gaze soft but intense. His hand reached for hers, his grip steady despite the trembling in his fingers. "Does this change anything?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with uncertainty, as though he were afraid of the answer. Vanessa's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. How could he even ask that? The love she felt for him was unshakable, grounded in something deeper than what anyone, even they themselves, could truly understand. She shook her head, her lips parting to speak, but no words came at first. Instead, she simply cupped his face in her hands, her touch tender as she leaned in closer. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes not leaving his. "It doesn't change anything. It just makes the story better." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. The story of their love had never been about perfection or ideals. It had been about real, raw connection. It had been about sacrifice, about pushing through the hardest of times and still finding a way to come out the other side. Not just surviving, but living. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as though the weight of her words had settled on him in ways he hadn't expected. There was no need for grand gestures or explanations. There was no need to prove anything anymore. What they had was enough, was everything. He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was soft, slow, and full of promises that only the two of them could understand. It wasn't a kiss of passion, though there was passion in it. It was a kiss of quiet understanding, a kiss that said, "We've made it through the storm, and now we can stand together." As they pulled away, Vanessa smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. "You've already given me everything I could ever need," she said softly, the truth of her words echoing in the stillness of the room. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I had lost it forever." Daniel's eyes shimmered as he looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had done the best he could to hide his vulnerability, but in her presence, it didn't matter anymore. She had seen him in his darkest moments and still loved him, and that love, unwavering, unconditional, was everything he had ever wanted. "And you gave me the strength to keep fighting," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've always been strong, but with you, I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be." Vanessa wrapped her arms around him once more, pulling him into her embrace as though she could hold him forever. "We're strong together," she whispered into his ear, her voice steady with certainty. "And nothing will ever change that." They held each other for a long time in the stillness of the night, wrapped in the quiet understanding that, together, they had conquered everything life had thrown at them. In the silence that followed, as the world outside seemed to fade away, Vanessa made one final promise, one that would carry them through every challenge, every obstacle, every fear they might face in the future. "I'll be with you," she murmured softly, her fingers intertwining with his. "No matter what, whether you walk, roll, or fly, I'll be beside you, always." In that moment, the weight of the past, the struggles, the pain, and the doubts all seemed to melt away. What remained was something far greater, love, steady and unshakable. And as they lay down together, not as a wife and a disabled husband, but as two souls who had saved each other in different ways, with the same kind of love, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it, together. As the night settled into its quiet rhythm, the world outside seemed far away, and all that remained in the room was the lingering warmth of their love. The soft rustle of the sheets was the only sound as Vanessa tucked herself beside Daniel, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the steady heartbeat that anchored her in this moment of peace. For a while, neither of them spoke, their fingers intertwined, their bodies pressed close as if to say, "I'm here, and you are safe." But the silence that had once felt heavy with unspoken words now felt like a comfort, a testament to the deep connection they shared. Then, as if he couldn't hold it in any longer, Daniel broke the silence, his voice low and steady, a slight tremor in the words. "Vanessa, I need to tell you something. I've been holding on to this for a long time." His eyes met hers, searching, as though he was trying to gauge her reaction before revealing what had been buried in his heart for so long. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. She could sense there was more to this than just words, more than the miracle of him standing earlier in the evening. She braced herself, her fingers tightening around his, silently telling him that whatever came next, she was ready to hear it. With a deep breath, Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I know tonight has been everything I've ever wanted, but there's something you don't know, something I haven't shared with you until now. His words were slow, deliberate, as if every syllable carried the weight of 1,000 untold truths. Vanessa's brow furrowed, her heart racing. What is it, Daniel? She asked, her voice thick with concern, yet filled with an unwavering calm that only years of shared experiences could create. I've been working, he said, a slight tremor in his voice. Working for months, secretly, on my own. He swallowed hard, the emotion in his eyes revealing how deeply this had affected him. The doctors told me I shouldn't get my hopes up, that I might never walk again, but I couldn't let go of the idea of standing beside you. Not just for tonight, but for our future. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to process the weight of his words. What are you saying? Her voice was barely audible, her heart now thudding loudly in her chest. With a deep breath, Daniel gently pulled away from her and reached for the drawer next to the bed, pulling out a small envelope. He handed it to her, and as she opened it, she found a set of medical reports and scans, evidence of the treatments he had been undergoing in secret. It was then that the pieces began to fall into place. His quiet determination, the hours he had spent alone, the strength he had kept hidden from her. Spinal stimulation, Vanessa whispered, her hand trembling as she read the words. You've been trying to walk again? Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with vulnerability. Yes, I couldn't let you marry someone who couldn't stand, not just for you, but for me too. I wanted to give you everything I had. I didn't want this to be about a miracle or hope. It wasn't about trying to fix myself. It was about knowing you loved me no matter what. But tonight, I wanted to give you something back. Just once, I wanted to stand beside you, to show you that I'm not just the man who can't walk. I'm the man who's standing because you believed in me. Vanessa was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, the depth of his love crashing over her in waves. She never expected this. Never expected him to hide something so monumental. He had done it all, not out of pride, but because he wanted to give her more than just his heart. He wanted to give her a future, one that wasn't defined by his limitations. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her hands reaching for him, pulling him into a tight embrace. She kissed him, fiercely and tenderly, as though she could pour all the love she had into that one moment, as if she could erase every doubt, every fear he'd carried. You don't need to prove anything, she whispered between kisses. You've already given me everything. Every single part of you, even the parts you didn't think I would love. And I will always be here, by your side, no matter what. Daniel closed his eyes, his face pressed into her hair as he held her tightly. The weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders, and in that moment, he knew the truth. No matter how much he tried to change, it was her love that had already made him whole. It wasn't about walking, or standing, or doing anything for anyone else. It was about the connection they had, the unspoken promise that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. As they lay back down together, their fingers intertwined beneath the sheets, the room seemed to hum with the quiet certainty of their love. There were no grand gestures left to make, no more secrets to hide, just two people who had fought for each other in their own ways, and who, in the end, had found something greater than either of them had ever expected. A love that didn't need to be fixed, just cherished. And in the stillness of the night, Vanessa whispered once more, the words soft but resolute, I'm here, and I always will be. Whether you walk, roll, or fly, I'll be beside you, always. The night stretched on, quiet now, but the warmth between them seemed to fill the room, holding them in a space where nothing else mattered. The hours that had been marked by laughter, by the rush of celebration, were now just memories, fading into the softness of the moments they shared alone. Vanessa lay beside Daniel, their fingers intertwined beneath the sheets, both of them lost in the rhythm of their breathing, the weight of the day pressing gently against their minds. But there, in the stillness, something stirred. It wasn't just the comfort of their bodies close together, nor the soft hum of the city beyond the window. It was the realization that, in this quiet, they had both changed, grown, in ways neither could have predicted. Vanessa turned slightly, her eyes meeting Daniel's in the dim light. She saw something in him, a new depth, a quiet joy that had only begun to surface. The man she had married was not the same one she had met months ago, not the same one who had saved her life, nor the one who had clung to a sense of purpose despite his pain. He was stronger now, not just physically, but emotionally. He had faced his fears, his insecurities, and had let go of the parts of himself he thought were broken. And in doing so, he had given her something she hadn't known she needed, the assurance that nothing could tear them apart. Daniel's eyes held hers, steady and filled with something deep, something real. "Do you think it changes anything?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath, as if he was seeking confirmation of what he already knew. "What we have, does this miracle change what we are?" Vanessa felt the words stir in her chest, a rush of emotions threatening to spill over. She had no answers, no clear-cut response. All she had was the truth of her heart. Slowly, she leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against his, as if she could fuse her spirit to his in that small, sacred gesture. She had always known that love wasn't about the grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about this, about the quiet understanding, the knowing that no matter the circumstances, they would always choose each other. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the weight of the question. "It doesn't change anything. It only makes it better. Because now I know that even when I wasn't sure, you were fighting, and you fought for us." Her lips brushed his gently, as if sealing the promise in that kiss. "You've given me more than enough," she murmured, pulling back to look into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, still raw and exposed, yet confident in its truth. His breath hitched, a tear escaping down his cheek, but it was a tear of relief, of release. He had carried so much on his shoulders for so long, not just the weight of his physical limitations, but the burden of being seen as less than whole. But here, in this room, in the quiet of their shared love, he was more than whole. He was loved. He was seen. And most importantly, he was enough. "I don't need any more than what we have," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his hands pulling her closer, if that was even possible. "But I want to be enough for you. I want to be the man who can give you everything, even when I'm not sure I can." Vanessa smiled, her heart swelling in her chest as she kissed him again, this time with all the tenderness she had been holding back, all the love that had built up in the months they had shared. She wanted him to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that nothing had changed. She wasn't in love with him because of what he could or couldn't do. She was in love with him because of who he was, the man who saved her life, who stood by her through the darkest of times, and who continued to love her even when it wasn't easy. "You are everything," she whispered, as if to remind him, to remind herself, that love wasn't about fixing or changing. It was about growing together, learning together, and choosing each other over and over again. "You're everything I've ever needed, and I will always be here, right beside you." They lay together in the stillness, their hearts beating in sync, their souls connected in a way that was both unspoken and undeniable. There was no need for more promises, no need for grand declarations. What they had was enough. They had each other. And in the quiet, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart in heart, always.